Welcome back to Anews. I'm Elif Saatçıoğlu and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. On today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakenar and political analyst Javed Rana will be joining me to discuss the impact of Turkey's peace diplomacy in ending the war in Ukraine and the Israeli genocide in Gaza. But before we begin today's discussions, let's take a look at the news report.
Russia and Ukraine agreed to exchange more prisoners of war and return the bodies of 12,000 soldiers after peace talks in Istanbul on Monday. The warring sides met for barely an hour for only the second such round of negotiations since March 2022. But there was no breakthrough on a proposed ceasefire, which Ukraine, its European allies, and the US have urged Russia to accept.
Our proposal is an unconditional ceasefire in the air, sea and land, at least for 30 days. This position has remained unchanged for the 3 months, and we consider it the basis for starting a peaceful resolution.
Russia says it wants a long-term settlement rather than a pause in the war. Ukraine says Russia does not want peace and that new sanctions are needed to force it to pursue a ceasefire. Following Monday's talks, Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky said Russian negotiators had handed their Ukrainian counterparts a detailed memorandum outlining Moscow's terms for a full ceasefire, and also suggested a short ceasefire to collect the bodies of dead soldiers. According to Russian media, Moscow said it would only agree to end the war if Ukraine gives up big new chunks of territory and accepts limits on the size of its army.
The third point in our agenda is a meeting of leaders. We firmly believe that all key issues can only be solved at the level of leaders. And the leaders' meeting could be with possible involvement of other leaders, such as President of the United States.
Well, let's talk about it. Mustafa Kocakenar is joining us. Mustafa, welcome back. I mean, actually, you are the one who is hosting me here today, but let's start by talking about the meeting. So, Ukraine and Russia met in Istanbul on Monday during the second round of peace talks. The first one wasn't quite the one that we expected. How are you analyzing this meeting, and what could we expect from the decision that is taken in this meeting?
Elif, Turkey's financial cultural capital Istanbul hosted the second round of peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia this week. As you know, in May, Istanbul also hosted the first round of peace talks between two warring sides. Ukrainian and Russian delegations came together in Istanbul to discuss terms for possible ceasefire and peace deal. But there are right now many different demands coming from both Russia and Ukraine. Russia wants immediate ceasefire, prisoner swap and child return. On the other hand, Russia is seeking Ukraine's concessions about its political sovereignty and territorial integrity. I think these different demands need to be reconciled, and right now it is up to Turkey to reconcile these different demands from both Ukraine and Russia. And Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan reiterated Turkey's determination to facilitate or mediate any peace talks between Russia and Ukraine to put an end to the ongoing conflicts in the Eastern Europe region. On the other hand, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan also called for leader-to-leader diplomacy between regional and international stakeholders to reach a ceasefire or peace deal between two warring sides. But this week's peace talks between two warring sides didn't yield positive results in terms of reaching any ceasefire or peace deal. I think it can be considered as one of the most important steps in terms of finding blueprint for possible ceasefire. I think that Turkey will continue to prioritize diplomacy and dialogue among regional and international stakeholders to find a common way or common sense to halt ongoing conflicts in the region.
Well, when you consider it like that, what would you say about the reflections on the meetings? Because the first one wasn't quite successful, but it was because of the relationship between the US president and the Russian president at the time, and they were coming back and forth about this. Now we have a second meeting. What do you think about the reflections of it during the international phase? Like, what do you think the Western world would say about this meeting itself?
Well, first of all, Elif, first of all, I can say that international community is right now praising Turkey's diplomatic efforts to end war between Ukraine and Russia. Both the US president and the European leaders are hailing Turkey's diplomatic efforts to find a peace between two important neighbors in the Eastern Europe. On the other hand, I think that right now there are three different approaches to the Ukraine-Russia war. The first approach is the American one, and the United States is calling for immediate ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia and the cessation of the ongoing conflicts. On the other hand, there is also second approach, and it is the European one. And European nations, I think, right now in favor of ongoing conflicts in the region. European leaders always reaffirmed their strong support for Ukraine's political sovereignty and territorial integrity. But Russian decision makers are accusing European nations of sabotaging peace talks between two warring sides. And there is also a third approach, and it is the Turkish one. And Turkey, since the very beginning of the crisis between Ukraine and Russia, has been always calling for diplomacy and dialogue. Turkey thinks that if the international community wants to see long-standing peace and stability in the Eastern Europe, all stakeholders, warring sides, should sit at the same negotiating table. But we can understand that right now the United States is eager to exclude Ukraine from the peace talks. On the other hand, Europeans are keen to exclude Russia from the negotiating table. And Turkey's balanced approach to the Ukraine-Russia war, I think, is being praised by the international community, because Turkish decision makers reiterate at every opportunity that there will be no winners at the ongoing war, and there will be no losers in just peace. Within this context, I think that Turkey will continue to push for dialogue and diplomacy to bring together both the Ukrainian and Russian leaders and the US president to reach a long-standing and sustainable peace between two important neighbors in the region.
Well, whilst we're talking about this, also the one thing is unfolding in the field as well. Ukraine and Russia are continuing to attack each other. Actually, last week, Russia conducted one of the worst drone attacks of this war in Kiev region, which is the most important part of the Ukraine. On Sunday, we saw Ukraine launching drones deep into Russian territories, where over 40 warplanes were damaged. Can we realistically achieve a ceasefire when attacks continue?
Elif, it is crystal clear right now that both Ukraine and Russia are escalating a military offensive in their respective territories. As you mentioned, that Ukraine launched one of the most important attacks against Russian territory. I think Russia will be compelled to retaliate against the Ukrainian strikes, and it is all coming amid peace negotiations between two warring sides. Given the geopolitical situation on the ground, I don't think that both sides can reach immediate ceasefire or peace deal anytime soon, because as I mentioned that there are many complex issues between Ukraine and Russia right now to cope with. As you know, Russia annexed Ukraine's one of the most important cities, Crimea, in 2014. No one from the Western countries and Turkey is recognizing the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. But Russians are presenting their memorandum for possible peace deal with Ukraine. But I don't think that these demands can be acceptable for the Ukrainian side. Right now, Ukraine is also seeking security assurances from its Western allies. As I mentioned, that United States is eager to criticize Ukraine's ongoing military activities in the region. U.S. President Donald Trump has been always calling for immediate ceasefire between two warring sides, but I don't think that Russia and Ukraine will reach a ceasefire anytime soon. But maybe Turkey's diplomatic actions and initiatives will yield positive results in terms of ensuring ceasefire, maybe for 30 days or 60 days. But if they want to resolve their bilateral or multilateral disputes, I think both the regional and international stakeholders will be supposed to find a common way and a common sense to cope with the shared security challenges in the European continent.
Well, when we talk about what is going on in the field, it is actually important to highlight what is going on in the ceasefire talks in the table right now. And when we look at the parameters that we are seeing, I think the bullet points that Russia is sharing is still quite harsh, isn't it? Because they're still saying that no, they're refusing to join any military alliances for Ukraine. They want the neutrality. Also, in addition to that, they want Ukraine to be free of nuclear or other weapons of mass destruction, basically without any power to protecting itself. So those are the key points. And there is more to strip Ukraine away from certain powerful stance. What would you say about this bullet points? Do you think it is realistic? Do you think that Ukraine is going to come around, come in terms with it? And even if they do you think it's fair to Ukraine?
Elif, I don't think that Russia's demands are realistic, because they are asking Ukraine to give up its political sovereignty and territorial integrity. On the other hand, Ukraine, I think, cannot continue its military actions against Russia's aggressions without support coming from the United States. And there is right now Ukraine fatigue, I think, among European and Western countries. U.S. President Donald Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance diplomatically humiliated Zelensky in front of the international media at the end of February. And it is showing that right now United States is eager to give up its military support for Ukraine. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking assurances from the European nations. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz are reaffirming their country's support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and political sovereignty. But as I mentioned, I don't think that Ukraine can continue to defend itself against so-called Russian aggression without strong support coming from the United States. And Russia's demands are also not realistic in terms of ensuring peace and stability in the region. I think right now it is up to Turkey to reconcile diplomatic demands coming from both Ukraine and Russia, because, as you know, Turkey has been enjoying close relationships with both Ukraine and Russia in many fields, ranging from politics and economy to trade and military. I think Turkey's role as a facilitator or mediator will be a blueprint for reaching a ceasefire or peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, but I think it will take some time.
Well, speaking of Turkey, let's talk about President Erdogan's statements as well. Lastly, he wants President Trump, Zelensky and Putin to visit Turkey to end this war once and for all. How are you viewing this in the terms of Turkish president's diplomacy?
Elif, as you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has been always calling for dialogue and diplomacy to deal with the international security challenges. Turkey has been always reiterating the importance of regional solutions for regional problems. And since the very beginning of the crisis between Ukraine and Russia in 2022, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan have been in contact with their counterparts from several countries to discuss what can be done in terms of ensuring long-standing peace and stability in the Eastern Europe. I think Turkey's diplomatic actions is being hailed by the international community. All leaders are reiterating their support for Turkey's diplomatic actions to reach peace between Ukraine and Russia. I think that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan will continue to increase awareness about the security situation in the region, because right now Turkish foreign policy makers think that if there is something wrong in the region, it will spread chaos to other regions of the world, and it will pose a huge threat to international peace and security. I think all international stakeholders, regional countries, will be supposed to take Turkey's security demands into the consideration if they want to ensure international peace and security.
Well, we're going to talk about it more, but now let's look at the another news package. With amid heightened global tensions, Turkey and the United States are stepping up diplomatic coordination to help resolve some of the world's most urgent conflicts, from Eastern Europe to the Middle East.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan held a phone conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio as part of ongoing diplomatic efforts to de-escalate global conflicts and promote peace, according to diplomatic sources. The two top diplomats focused primarily on the war in Ukraine, reviewing the outcomes of the second round of peace talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations held in Istanbul. The negotiations resulted in a new agreement to expand the scope of prisoner exchanges, this time prioritizing children and the most severely wounded soldiers. Additionally, both sides committed to the mutual return of 6,000 deceased soldiers, marking a rare humanitarian breakthrough amid the prolonged conflict. Fidan and Rubio also discussed the rapidly evolving situations in Syria and Gaza. Amid continued violence in the Palestinian enclave, both sides exchanged views on efforts to reach a ceasefire and deliver humanitarian relief. Türkiye has been stepping up its diplomatic engagement in the region, advocating for immediate international action to halt the bloodshed in Gaza and calling for a just and lasting solution to the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The conversation reflects Türkiye's broader strategy of active engagement in regional and international crises, positioning itself as a key mediator with open channels to both Western allies and conflicting parties. The dialogue with Rubio also highlighted continued coordination between Ankara and Washington on pressing global security challenges.
Now we'll take a look at Daily Sabah and what did they say in their bullet points and headlines. Let's take a look. Israel turns aid route into massacre. It says Israeli forces killed at least 27 Palestinians near a Gaza aid site amid mounting tensions, disputed claims over access and safety concerns as the conflict still deepened, with both sides reporting heavy losses. They came with the headlines with Israel's attack. So what would you say about this, Mustafa?
Elif, as you know, the United States and Israel have recently launched so-called new humanitarian operation in Gaza. And as you know, Palestinian people right now are being starved to death by the Israeli security forces. And Israeli security forces opened fire against people asking for international help to feed themselves. As you know, Israeli security forces so far have been murdering more than 55,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children in the region. On the other hand, right now there is international pressure on Israel right now to halt its military offensive in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. I think that these type of actions will not yield positive results for Israel's security. But right now, I think that Israel is being diplomatically isolated from the international community, and Turkey's diplomatic actions to increase awareness about the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people living in the region are being recognized by the international community right now. And I think that if Israel continues its military aggression in the region, it will not yield positive results in terms of de-escalating geopolitical tensions in the Middle East.
Well, what we have on the side, that we have another thing that we have been talking about actually with Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine hits Crimea bridge amid stalled peace talks, it says, and it talks about a senior Ukrainian official landing in Washington yesterday, aiming to secure a vital U.S. support against Russia. Even Kyiv has demonstrated its resolve with a bold symbolic strike on a key bridge emblematic of Moscow's contested claims. And it continues about the hitting of a bridge during such important, such intense peace talks. What would you say about this? Because we have been talking over it. It is a quite intense moments that they're having in Istanbul as well. How would you comment this attack by Ukraine?
Elif, as we mentioned about that, amid stealth peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul, Ukrainian security forces are taking aim at Russia's military installations and military infrastructure. But I think that it will not yield any positive results in terms of reaching a peace deal between two warring sides. But right now, it seems that both the warring sides are determined to increase their military aggressions in the ongoing conflicts. And as we mentioned, that Ukraine launched one of its most important attacks against Russian territory over the weekend. And yesterday, they also hit Crimea bridge amid stalled peace talks. I think that if they continue to take steps in terms of increasing tensions in the region, it will not be possible to bring long-standing peace and stability to the Eastern Europe.
Well, lastly, what we see is inside Turkey. So it is an important bullet point. Let's talk about that as well. Annual inflation dips more than expected to 35.4% in May, it says. So what would you say about that?
Elif, this inflation trend is continuing in Turkey right now, as Daily Sabah's headline indicates that annual inflation in Turkey dips more than expected to 35.4% in May, and it is clearly showing that the Turkish government's recent actions in terms of reducing the inflation rate is yielding positive results. As you know, Turkish government has been focusing on economic program to increase production, employment, and export in Turkey. On the other hand, Turkish economy makers have been taking steps to decrease the inflation number. There are right now many international challenges in the world economy. As you know, OECD also cuts global growth outlook to 2.9% amid trade wars. As you know, U.S. President Donald Trump has been pursuing ambitious trade agenda against many nations in the world. And amid international challenges, I think Turkish government's steps to reduce inflation rate will be watched by all economists to continue to monitor the economic and political situation in the country.
Well, thank you, Mustafa. Those were the three most important headlines of the day from Daily Sabah. But we are going to continue with what is going on in Israel.
Israeli fire killed and wounded dozens of Palestinians near a food distribution site in southern Gaza on Tuesday, local authorities said. That's as for a third day running, chaos and bloodshed marred an aid program run by a US-backed private aid group. This is the body of Reem Zaidan, killed as she waited for food with her children. Her 15-year-old son Ahmed describes what happened.
We haven't eaten in 2 months. Everything has been under siege. Of course we were going to go. Today my mother was telling my brother, lean over, lower your head, do what I'm doing. My brother turned his head, and then a bullet went into her head. We're supposed to be able to eat with dignity.
The Israeli military said its forces had opened fire on a group of individuals who had left designated access routes near the distribution centre in Rafah, and that it was investigating. As Reem's body was carried away, her brother Khalid shouts, "These are death traps, death traps." The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation began distributing aid last week amid widespread hunger. It is endorsed by Israel, but the United Nations has called its distribution centres militarised and says Palestinians are forced to risk their lives for food. This was spokesperson Jeremy Lawrence of UNHCR on Tuesday.
The willful impediment of access to food and other life-sustaining relief supplies for civilians may constitute a war crime. The threat of starvation, together with 20 months of killing of civilians and destruction on a massive scale, repeated forced displacements, intolerable, dehumanising rhetoric and threats by Israel's leadership to empty the strip of its population, also constitute elements of the most serious crimes under international law.
An International Committee of the Red Cross spokesperson said this field hospital in Rafah had received 184 casualties, at least 27 of whom were dead on arrival or shortly after. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation said it distributed 21 truckloads of food early on Tuesday, and that the aid operation was conducted, quote, safely and without incident within the site. Experts warn the enclave is at risk of famine after months of blockade and aid restrictions. There have been reports of repeated killings over the past 3 days near Rafah, as crowds gather before dawn. Palestinians who collected food boxes on Tuesday described scenes of pandemonium, with no one overseeing the handover of supplies or checking IDs, as the crowds jostled for provisions. The United Nations has called for an investigation into the killings.
Joining us now from Islamabad, Pakistan, is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, thank you so much for joining us. We have been talking about Russia and Ukraine. Now we have moved to Palestine. So my first question would be, with over 54,000 Palestinians killed and all of Gaza displaced and destroyed, how has the humanitarian response failed so catastrophically despite repeated United Nations warnings and international outcry?
Well, there has been no humanitarian response. That is a bigger question. This so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not a humanitarian response. These are the CIA and Mossad's contractor. This is essentially an espionage network, and that is a design to identify people and kill them. And more importantly, I think that is also that is a part of a bigger plan to expel Palestinians from Gaza. So I don't think there was any humanitarian response. It was more as a militaristic response in guise of so-called humanitarian shape. How could an apartheid state, which has killed more than 55,000 and have injured over 122,000 people and has almost destroyed the entire Gaza, how come we can expect them that they can come up with a humanitarian response? Humanitarian response was coming from United Nations. United Nations was banned or it was restricted inside occupied Gaza. Again, that is a bigger problem. There are hundreds of trucks lined up at the Gaza crossing. They are not being allowed to get in. And that could have been the humanitarian response. This Gaza Foundation is a military response. Let's not confuse with the words. These are the terminologies which West and the more particularly now the Israel is trying to make us believe that after 3 months it has resumed these aid packages, food packages. This is not true. These people are being killed at these so-called humanitarian aid sites. There are generations have been killed. I mean, during last couple of days, well over 100 people have been killed. I mean, how could there be killing spree at aid centers, at a humanitarian center? So this is essentially new tactics to begin with, to gather intelligence and then kill people on the spot, even on mere suspicion. But it looks like perhaps it is more like a part of a broader genocide campaign where people could be expelled from Gaza. We have to say it again and again because that is the reality on the ground.
Well, Javed, given the United States' consistent military and diplomatic backing of Israel also, and its vetoes at the UN Security Council, does this reflect the long-term success of the Zionist projects Washington helped shape decades ago?
I think if you have to know who's ruling over you, just look around, see against whom you cannot criticize. United States has been a country where it was known to express known for freedom of expression, freedom of association. It was unthinkable in United States that anyone can be arrested by merely criticizing Zionists, by merely criticizing a genocide campaign. It was unthinkable in United States that international students would be banned across the board just because they were protesting against genocide. So I think in that context, we have to see the present administration in the White House, which is an evangelical regime, which represent at least 62 hardcore Christian extremists. And they are hobnobbing with Zionists, and they believe that the arrival of their so-called, I would call it a false prophet, is so dear. So they are creating conditions, and they have to basically make it sure that no one stays in Gaza and the West Bank. The question that you raised, I'm coming to that side, but that we have to see in this context, when there is a religious, theological agenda on the ground, we should not expect that the United Nations Security Council would come up with any resolution which will ensure a ceasefire. That is not going to happen. We know it, you know it, everybody else know it, that the USA is going to veto the resolution which is expected in the UN Security Council. So I think the history is being written with a black ink, and the US name is going to be top among the backers of the genocide. And we have seen that there were previous similar resolutions on enforcing ceasefire. Those were vetoed, and some of which were again, they were passed, but again, they lacked the ceasefire enforcement. So in a broader context, I would say that we should not attach our hopes with the United States, which is a part and parcel of the genocide.
Well, what is the significance of President Macron's renewed push for a two-state solution and the upcoming joint UN peace conference led by France and Saudi Arabia? Can this diplomatic effort shift momentum amid Israel's continued offensive?
Well, I think France, during last couple of weeks, we have seen that some of the critical statements coming from the France against apartheid Israel. But again, France has to do something very concrete on the ground. It has to come up and come out in a manner that is seen that is a more European response, not just a response of France, because they are very much particular about what is going on in Ukraine, because they see their ethnic cleansing, they see their war crimes, and they got Russian President Putin to be declared as a war criminal. His arrest warrants were issued. But when it comes to Israel, just a mild criticism, and then let's not befool ourselves, and they cannot befool the world when the France and even the USA has been saying that they want a two-state solution. But again, what is happening on the ground? On the ground, they are doing everything to make it sure that any possible solution of a two states ceases to exist. When there would be no people inside Gaza, when there will be no people inside occupied West Bank, where would be the two-state? So Netanyahu has been saying time and again that there is already Palestinian states, because majority of the people in the Jordan, they belong to previous Palestine, and they are the Palestinians, so Palestinian state is there. And by and large, I think that is the agenda. White House is already synced with. These are the Zionists who are ruling in the White House. So again, in a broader context, I think we should not attach our hopes with the Zionists and their backers. France has been a part of the same campaign. Europe has been part of the same campaign. We cannot see France in isolation. We have to see France in a broader context, and that context has to be seen along with the UK, along with the Germany. Yes, lately it is the feeling that it is a genocide, but it is not saying in a forceful manner. So these mild criticism means nothing. You know better than I do. There is a bigger war going on in Gaza. It's a bigger genocide. It doesn't have any comparison of what is happening in the Ukraine. But again, the world focus is on Ukraine, because Ukraine is a Europe. Ethnically, people in Ukraine are European, so they have every concern with the European. They don't have any concern with the Muslims who are being slaughtered every day. 10 killed, 12 killed, 50 killed, 100 killed. That is the least concern of the West.
Well, Javed, thank you so much for your statements, and thank you so much for joining us here on Anews. Well, Mustafa, lastly, let's wrap it up. What would you say? I didn't ask your opinion about what is going on in Israel. What would you say about the statements of the Javed? He said that the relationship between the West and Israel is so tight that they do not care what is going on to Gazans and Palestinians. And he said that it will continue for a while like that. But we were talking about the peace initiatives and everything. What would you say about the current situation?
Elif, right now it is crystal clear that Israel is being diplomatically isolated from the international community, because right now there is international pressure on Israel to stop its military aggressions in the occupied Palestinian territories. But on the other hand, I can clearly say that Israeli decision makers desire to be only hegemon in the Middle East. They are taking aim at political sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries in the region. They are regularly attacking Syria's military infrastructure. They are targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen. They are also lobbying for military operations against Iran's nuclear capabilities. I think that right now there are two options in terms of ending Israel's ambitious policies in the region. One option is the United States, because right now the United States can be considered as one of the unique countries to convince the Israeli decision makers to stop their military offensive in the region. But we know that right now the American decision makers are reaffirming their unwavering support for Israel's so-called defense actions in the region. And second option is the unity and solidarity among the regional countries. I mean that Turkey, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates should be united in terms of dealing with the common and shared security challenges in the region. Turkey has been always trying to increase regional awareness about the latest geopolitical situation in the Middle East. I think that other countries in the region should take Turkey's demands into the consideration if they want to cope with the security problems in the region. Because right now Israel is continuing its military aggression in the region because there is no reactions from other countries. Turkey has been stopping its trade activities with Israel. Turkey has been always calling on other countries to increase their political and economic pressure on Israel. I think that Turkey's diplomatic actions will yield positive results in terms of stopping Israel's ambitious Middle East agenda and its expansionist policies in the region.
Well, Mustafa, thank you so much for this summary as well, and thank you so much for today's program. That brings us to the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.